Okay. Right, hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Anthony Peake Consciousness Hour. As usual, the Gremlins play games with us, and we've just had problems with my sound. And also, we seem to have lost my producer Dear over there in the United States, in Denver. I'm hoping that everything is okay, but I'm assuming that everybody can see us here, which is really good, and can see my wonderful guest, Dr. Carl Smith. I'd like to introduce you guys. I've known of Carl's work for quite a few years now, and we've sort of revolved around each other for quite a long time. In that I knew of his work and he knew of mine, and we've developed this great area of mutual interest and mutual admiration in the things we're both trying to do in terms of our working. Just to tell you a little bit about Carl. I'll be reading this, so it won't look that impressive, but it's one of those things. Okay. Carl H. Smith is Director of the Learning Technology Research Centre, the LTRC, and Principal Research Fellow at Ravensbourne University. He has 16 years' experience conducting R&D into the application of hybrid technologies for perceptual and cognitive transformation. He's currently working on 4 EU projects, including the Horizon 2020 project, WEKIT, which is Wearable Experience for Knowledge-Intensive Training, which aims to create wearable experiences, an entirely new form of media. His other projects involve context engineering, umwelt hacking, natural media, cyberdelics, sensory augmentation, empathy engines, memory palaces, artificial senses, and body hacking. Now, one of the highlights for last year's Breaking Convention at Greenwich University was attending Carl's lecture there. And if anybody gets the opportunity, Carl's lecture is available on their website, and it's well worth checking out. So Carl, without further ado, welcome to Consciousness Hour.
Thanks very much, Tony.
Okay, it's wonderful to have you here. Just to let everybody know as well that Carl was one of the gang of us that went up to Drakelow Caves this time last year, and we did an event called Recreating Plato's Cave. And I'm hoping that Carl will be joining me and a group of others when we try to reproduce that experiment, for want of a better term, in Athens, which hopefully my Greek publishers will be deeply involved in as well, and hopefully as well to get the involvement of the Greek Tourist Board. Now, just to tell me a little bit about your background, how you got into this work, because I've never really discussed this with you, so it'd be really interesting to know how did Carl Smith become involved in all this?
Yeah, well, basically, my background was art history, and then I did computer science. I was always interested in the mix between art and computing. And then I did architecture for 7 years. And during the 7 years of architecture, I did a lot of 3D modeling. And that did something to my brain. Spending many, many hours reconstructing these ancient buildings around the world. My first project after my studies in Glasgow Uni was reconstructing the Palace of Darius in Persepolis.
Wow.
In Iran, and it was utterly mind-blowing to jump out of one context and into another. But the process of doing all that 3D modeling was quite profound, because it would affect simple things like, because I was building such large structures, it kind of improved my vision. It improved my ability to drive. I was able to see further down the road. But it also started to program my dreams. I was able to sort of enter these spaces by working late into the night on these 3D models. I was then privy to that information in my dream world. So it started me, thinking about what is it about the ability to program dreams, the ability to look at your peripheral vision and access your peripheral vision by working on something that's of large vision. And I suppose that was a very early start. And then because of that 3D modeling, I got into virtual reality 20 years ago, because those models were then put into virtual space. And then because a lot of these were ruins, I could then put them into augmented reality space and superimposing the 3D model over the actual ruins. So that got me into that stuff very early on. And then moving into things like sensory augmentation, working with Cyborg Nest on their North Sense device, and thinking about not just vision and auditory stuff, but also what can we do with the other senses how can we create new senses? How can we combine the senses that we already have? You know, what kind of senses do we not normally think of as senses? And I've always been interested in the psychedelic realms, the entheogens, and all the rest of it. And I see all of those as different ways of accessing the perceptual realms that we normally think are very limited.
Can you tell us a little bit about this? I mean, there are two things, because one of the things that I hadn't realised that we both shared art history as a background, because many years ago I was going to be doing my own PhD in art history in the work of Piero della Francesca, particularly because Piero della Francesca quite fascinated me in the way he used virtually three-dimensional areas within his paintings. You know, for instance, you know, like the flagellation. I've seen work people have done with the patterns on the floor in the flagellation, whereby you can position all the figures within three-dimensional space because of it. So the work you're doing here is intriguing. But can you tell us a little bit about the mysteries and the way in which human perception works? Because it's one of the things that is quite central. A lot of people never really think about when we perceive things, what we really mean by this. Because you spend a few minutes just describing your position on this and your discoveries in terms of how human perception works vis-a-vis virtual reality and augmented reality as well.
Sorry, Tony, your audio is all gone. Like it's all like sounds like you've gone gremlin.
Oh right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, no, it's all gone. Whatever's changed, I don't know what it is, but there's a glitch in the matrix there.
Oh really? Okay. Can you hear me enough to answer the question?
No, I didn't hear the question. So
Okay.
just keep talking, maybe it'll come back.
Okay, the question was, in terms of your work with... No?
No.
We've lost it. This is problematic, isn't it, I think?
It's come back now.
Have I come back now? Okay. Okay, this is interesting, isn't it? What my question...
It's fine now, it's come back.
Okay. My question was, in terms of we mutually share an interest in art history. Yeah. And my interest, I was planning to do my PhD in the art of Piero della Francesca, and particularly his painting The Flagellation, which intrigued me. And I'm always interested in how art can be applied to virtual reality and such like, and seemingly this is what you're doing. And I was interested if you could just explain to the listeners and the watchers, or whatever we want to call them, as to when you talk about consciousness and perception, just tell us a little bit about the state of play of what we mean when we talk about perceptual reality, just for a few minutes, just to give us a little bit of background before we move into the VR aspects.
Yeah, well, if we think about the early ways of representing space in paintings, for instance, just to follow on from that theme, it's before linear perspective kind of codified space. We saw many different experiments from different cultures creating their own forms of space in those paintings. And it's very interesting to me, like that was part of my thesis, was to look at those different ways of representing space and to think what was lost with linear perspective in terms of perception and in terms of our abilities to represent the world. And it's interesting that when linear perspective was codified in the Renaissance, a lot of artists chose not to use it because they felt as if that they lost something in the translation of bringing that convention into their paintings. And it's super interesting if you think about the fact that all of our media, all of our lenses, all of our cameras are all based on linear perspective, but we don't actually see in linear perspective. We see more in curvilinear perspective, and you can tell that because if you put a meter ruler underneath your nose and you look into your peripheral vision, then the ends of that meter ruler will bend upwards. So what does that mean in terms of our media? So our media is fundamentally flawed, and that means everything, and we do the translation. Our brains, are very adept at translating an image that's created in linear perspective into something that we can cope with. But if we think about virtual reality for a second and think about if we're then putting images into virtual reality that are based on linear perspective, and then we're absorbing into that world, and there's no escape from that world. On our phones we have very small real estate, and it's not so problematic. But in a virtual reality realm, these things become very problematic. In our work on natural media, Tony Langford and co with photography are trying to undo that linear perspective issue at the core of the games engine. So they're actually utilizing the GPU and actually correcting that issue right there. So I suppose that's a nice example of the fact that we are perceiving a reality that is a hallucination. And another great example is out of Bristol's Intangible Realities Lab, David Glowacki and co have created something called ISNIS. And ISNIS, you'd love, Tony, it basically allows you to see what you actually look like in terms of light, in terms of energy. And they've got a physics engine behind their experience. It's a 4-person experience. And they use the mudra, so the thumb being the cosmic consciousness and the forefinger being your individual consciousness. When you connect the two in the VR, in this VR experience, you create light. So all you see is a piece of light in the VR experience. You just look at your hands, you don't see your body, you don't see anything apart from these 2 instances of light. And the other 3 people are also just represented by 2 dots of light once they create the mudra. And then when we all created our mudras, then the physics engine connects us in terms of using these equations and of the physics. And so you're seeing yourself as light, as matter. And I'm really intrigued by how much of what we
Carl, you seem to have frozen.
And so much of what we want to access may be on the other side of that. And that's why people do experiment with these psychedelics and with entheogens. And I'm really intrigued by the consciousness of light and the different degradations of light in, say, for instance, the astral plane. In the dream realms, we're seeing light bodies, we're seeing things emanating light, and in our normal everyday life we're very dependent on the sun, which is producing light and shining light upon objects, much like in DMT. It relates directly to the astral because you're seeing this holographic light in everything's made of light, and that for me is, we're seeing with the Imperial study that there is a direct link between the astral and what seems to be going on in DMT. I would certainly agree with Gallimore that it's more of an orthogonal reality rather than a dream reality. I definitely think it's nothing like my dreams, apart from the fact that in the astral you have a light body, you are seeing things made of light quite often. But then when you go to the next level up, which is 5-MeO DMT, you literally are experiencing yourself as the light source. So I'm really intrigued by those different degradations, if you call it, different relationships with light in different types of consciousness. And what does that mean? That we can access, whilst in this 3rd dimension, we can access all of those ranges. And so for me, my current interest in consciousness is what is that? What does that mean? And an experience like ISNIS is a fantastic way of transforming yourself into light.
That is absolutely intriguing in so many different levels, because this is very much the area I've been fascinated by. The nature of light, the nature of when we are in altered states of consciousness, what is the state of illumination that's going on? How is it you see shadows? There seems to be light sources going on, but also the implications here for the concept of biophotons and everything else as well. And with this, the work of a friend of mine, Istvan Bokken in the States, is very, very intriguing. And I feel that we could probably go off, because I'm so fascinated with what you just said. You've triggered so many questions in my mind, but these are questions that are probably going to get quite technical, and I think we probably need to lead them to when you and I next meet, because there's a lot of what you were saying there is really, really exciting. So in terms of your own work, and we'll come back to your work later, but in terms of your own transformative experiences, in your own research. Can you tell us a little bit about this?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I suppose it all started at the magical number of 27. When I was 27 years old, I had my first transformative experience, I suppose. Um, and that was actually on New Year's Eve, 1999. And I was expecting, everyone was expecting the the millennium bug to hit at midnight, and everyone expected the computers to all go down or something tragic to happen to the world's systems. Um, but I was, I was in a friend's flat at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a whatever, I think it was a Friday, and I literally went into this upper it was in the upstairs, and it was an empty lounge, and I walked into this empty room, and I went directly out of body, like standing up. I was without any warning. I was taken out of body, and I felt myself go up, and I suddenly was aware that I was just this ginormous beam of light, and I was just made of energy, just pure unlimited energy, and I was this javelin or a spear. Imagine a spear of light, and obviously quite a shock as to what had happened. And then I was aware that I was rotating in this wheel of light, and there were 7 other beams of light that I was actually a part of. And as soon as I realized this bike wheel of light, imagine a bike wheel with spokes, I was told that this disembodied voice was saying, your soul is inhabiting 7 other bodies, and you're only aware of one in this constellation of light. But look up, because you're in a larger structure of light. This wheel of light is only one part of what you are, and look up. And before I could look up, my friend was calling my name from downstairs. And as he called my name, I was pulled out of that space and was gradually poured back into my body. So imagine a bottle, and my feet are at the bottom of the bottle and my head's at the top, and I'm being poured back in. And yeah, effectively I was told again by this voice, you're not Carl, you're having the experience of being Carl, but you're much larger than that. And the second thing was, there is no death. And the third thing was, tell everybody. And I thought I really liked that last bit of advice, because everyone's always, whenever you talk about your transformative experiences, always keep it to yourself. These things are very private, they're not meant to be spoken of, and if you do, you desecrate the experience. But that permission, if you like, was something that I've always taken to heart. And from there, I really wanted to understand what the hell caused that experience, and what was it, and what was it related to the fact that it was a special day in the year. I mean, it was completely, there was certainly no substances involved. I was entirely sober. And yeah, I still to this day have no idea what could have caused it, because when I started to explore the entheogens, and nothing like that experience, nothing at all. Even the 5-MeO experience is absolutely very, very different. No disembodied voices. So it seemed like a one-off experience that was my big breakthrough and my big kind of motivator and what it really taught me was that consciousness isn't behind your eyes. It's absolutely everywhere. And things like language, the technology of language has basically put us in a box. And me being told from an early age, you're Carl, you're Carl, you're Carl. Even when I was a child, I was able to look at a tree and be the tree. There was no difference between me and this tree. I was actually, it was only as I was programmed and told this is what you are, this is what you are, that I began to separate from everything else. And I always think of language as the great distancer in that sense. But obviously it's a technology, and it's a double-edged sword like everything else.
So what do you think? You've had years to think about this experience, and I remember you telling me about this when we first met, or the second time we met, and it's always intrigued me, the idea of 7. Your consciousness is part of 7 entities. Have you researched anywhere else, any other cultures or any other belief systems that reflect something similar to that?
It's funny, because I found a book called Enoch's, the knowledge book. And in that book, just browsing it, course, about many years ago now. But I came across a diagram, and it's actually in my Breaking Convention talk, with exactly that diagram of what I went through, and it was like this wheel of light with spokes, and it's called the Programming Station of Awe. And I'm far too busy to use this as an excuse, but how I haven't looked into that even more to understand what that could be. But it's it's fascinating, and almost as fascinating as my other really profound one. I mean, I've had many different transformative experiences.
Please tell us.
Really stick into my mind, which is at the age of 40, I had a life review. I don't know whether I told you about this. I think I've mentioned it briefly in the talk.
Please share it.
A life review, and I think this was our very first conversation when you were doing one of your talks. There was an open session at the end of one of your talks, and people spoke about their transformative experiences. And I always think, one of the things I've always asked people is not what they do, but have you left your body? And it's always, I've probably asked about 1,000 people, and it's very interesting the results you get from asking people such questions. But my life review was unbelievable, because I experienced my entire life in reverse, and it was absolutely recorded. Everything was there. Like literally every part of my life had been recorded, and I was able to experience it in a cinematic field of view. And what was fascinating about it was that I was no longer, so I was in my current state of consciousness, completely fine, just normal, but no longer living in a forward direction, just having this review. And then I was in a second state of consciousness, or a double consciousness, if you like, of my past. So I was literally watching this film of myself. But what I realized very quickly is that I was able to leave my consciousness in my body and enter anything else in the scene. So the first thing I tried was to become a table, and I went into this table and I became wood, and I had this sort of sensation of being a table. And then I was in a table, I was in my consciousness back then, and I was in my consciousness now. So I was in 3 states of consciousness. And so I was really profoundly amazed that I could go into anything that I had lived. So I had to have lived it in order to have it was only the things that I'd explored in my life. There was no sort of like, I couldn't access anything that I hadn't lived. So, I was able to go into films and become the actors, and go into books and become the authors, and I could go into anybody else and be them and me. So I was able to go into other people, experience like what I'd done to them as them and me at the same time. And I quickly grasped that most likely karma is not some sort of like, abstract thing. When you pass, when you die, you're most likely going to experience what you've done to somebody as them. So you experience it as them and yourself at the same time, and you have this ultimate, way of learning. There's no escaping it. And I think that really was very profound, and made me realize that be very, very careful about how you live your point of view, because that point of view will give you the field of view in the next phase. So it's like, who do you spend your time with that you want to learn from? Because if you spend some time with them for a day, you can access them when there is no time.
You said it went in reverse. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Say that again, Tony.
You said it went in reverse. Your panoramic life review was in reverse.
Yeah, so I experienced my entire 40 years in reverse. So I went from 40 to 39 to 38 to 37, and the entire experience lasted, it was real time, so it lasted 40 years. But in our time, it lasted 1 hour.
Good Lord. So when it was going, but it wasn't, the imagery was not running backwards as such, but you were experiencing something when you were 40, then experiencing something when you were 39, and then 38. Yeah, that suggests episodic, but it couldn't have been. Yeah, it was episodic.
Yeah.
Because this reminds me of Philip K. Dick's novel, The Counterclock World, which is quite intriguing if you've read it. It's quite... Okay, worth testing out. And of course, the term you used earlier on, orthogonal time, as well, was very much a Philip K. Dick concept that Philip K. Dick wrote about in his exegesis. But I'm really intrigued in this panoramic life review because clearly you were experiencing, and you experienced right back to what your point of birth. How far back did you go?
Yeah, I mean, it was the whole thing. I mean, I remember just getting smaller, and but what was fascinating was that ability to. I mean, I wasn't really the focus. It was the fact that I was able to enter other people and spend as much time. I mean, there was no time. It was kind of timeless, and it was a place of learning, which made me think that this is, you experience your life in reverse. You experience your life as a life review in order to learn as much as you can. And we talked about this in the summer that maybe we know that DMT is released at death. Maybe there's some time dilation that goes on there. But again, this was another experience without any help from any substances. But it really struck me that I, in both of those transformative experiences, got a clue into the mechanisms of creation, mechanisms of consciousness, and why we're here and what we are here to do. And now I'm very, this is why I write a diary so frequently every day for 30 years, is because I want to make sure that I'm utilizing that knowledge and utilizing that point of view properly.
Because it is almost like a novel by Borges here, isn't it? Or a short story by Borges, the idea of experiencing everything in your life and experiencing it from other people's point of view. Because, in my concept of cheating the ferryman, this is exactly what I suggest. At the point of death, there's a release. Originally, I said it was glutamate, but now I think it's endogenous DMT. And that takes you back because everything is recorded. Everything is recorded orthogonally. So, and you experience everything that it's possible to experience. Now, when you last told me that, it enthralled me because it was vindication of my own hypothesis. And it's so important to realize that, we are experiencing this life, but we're experiencing this life as an overall experience, as a holographic experience, literally in terms of holographics. And to speak to somebody like you about your experience there, it is just astounding. It is absolutely astounding. And I think we could do just a whole program on that. But I know that we have to move on. So can you tell me something about your present work and what you're doing now? Because you're involved in something called the Cyberdelic Society. This really interests me. Can you tell me more about this? Or before you do that, Col, the book you mentioned, the book of was it from the Book of Enoch, or was it a book? It was in the Book of Enoch, the original Book of Enoch. So we're talking about the Apocryphal Gospel of Enoch.
Yeah.
Whoa, we really do have to talk. We really do. Okay, but going on to the Cyberdelic Society, can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Sure enough. So I mean, I'm very intrigued by the power of the psychedelic experience, the benefits, and we're seeing benefits across the board when it comes to LSD being used for alcoholics. We're seeing PTSD being looked at with things like psilocybin. Depression being not cured with ketamine, but it's certainly being the worst of it being mitigated against if people are suicidal as a temporary measure. And I see a lot of people on SSRIs that are taking these pills daily, when a macrodose of a psilocybin experience can actually alter you profoundly in one day. And therefore not needing to be dependent on drugs that are detrimental. So I'm really intrigued by the power of these substances and the fact that a lot of these illegal substances are being used to treat the problems caused by the legal drugs. So, but not everyone's going to take them, and absolutely, they shouldn't. If you're doubting yourself, and they're generally non-specific amplifiers. They'll amplify anything that's underlying in the subconscious anyway. So they can be quite dangerous. And so I was always interested in how do we get people to those states without the substances. And I suppose my work now is in two different categories. So I'm looking at different technologies that can not replicate those psychedelic experiences, but at least allow people to explore their own consciousness, which is your birthright, which has been taken away in the culture that we're in, which is one of consumption and consumption of things external to yourself. So I'm very interested in how do we bring people back to their own felt experience. And we're seeing now with the current crisis that the people that were absolutely anti-technology in a very sort of Luddite way, and absolutely that technology is being terribly designed and is harvesting our attention, and is something that we demand should be better for us and not better for the corporations. But the point is that can we use technologies to democratize the psychedelic experience, to enable people that are too scared to try a psychedelic because of the loss of control, and the beauty of some of the VR experiences, etc., is that you can take them off at any moment. You can't undo once you've taken and ingested an ayahuasca journey. You can't stop it. And a lot of people would say that the lack of control is part of the process. Absolutely, I think that's true with the psychedelics, but I think that the complementary psychedelics and the potential of moist media, which is when you're combining the entheogens and the psychedelics with the VRs and these experiences, then you're seeing a whole new science open up. And a case in point, I know David Proeckl and Ioannis are doing a study with Imperial where they're going to look at a low dose of psilocybin whilst doing that experience where you're turning yourself into light to see if you can enhance the experience. And I know that David's already published a brilliant paper that's readily available online, where he's compared Ioannis with a psychedelic experience, and they've got some very, very incredible results. But when you combine the two, I think that's when the magic really starts, and I'm really intrigued by the combinations and not limiting. I mean, we have a big opportunity with these technologies to create them in a way that we want. And I think the DIY culture, we can't predict the future, but we can invent it. So it's about getting those narratives out there and getting people, we decided to call it a cyberdelic society because we want to meet the others. We created incubators all over Europe and over the world where we would go to different cities, major cities, and actually see what other people are doing in those cities in terms of psychedelics. So creating a network around that principle, and you're seeing lots of different grassroots groups springing up. So you've got things like technodelics. Technodelics is different again to cyberdelics because technodelics is not focused on the digital. It's not focused so much on the internet. It's focused on any stimulus that can create an altered state of consciousness. And you could argue that that's all of art. Then you've got digidelics. You've got psychotechnologies from Vavaki, and there's lots of different transformative tech sort of grammar that's growing as a result of the growth of these technologies and people wanting to do tech for good on themselves, tech for good on society. We're seeing amazing work done by the Centre for Humane Technologies, which is a backlash against Google and the harvesting of our attention, as I mentioned. So the downgrading of humanity is occurring, and we are being subjected to all of these tremendously powerful psychological algorithms that are just there to turn us into data, to monetize our attention, and this is what all of these things are trying to backlash against.
Yeah, because one of the things that again I'm fascinated on the implications for lockdown at the moment on people's consciousness, on people's dreaming states and everything else as well. And it's an area that really needs to be researched. And one of the things that really fascinated me about your work was when you did your presentation last August at Breaking Convention, when you were describing what you were doing in terms of virtual reality with the virtual reality headset that you were wearing when you did your lecture. Can you tell the guys a little bit about that? Because that was a very intriguing experiment, and indeed what results you got from it.
Yeah, so that's the Seeing Eye project that I'm working with Mark Farid and his team, and that's been a long time in the making. So 5 years to put that together and to get the hardware good enough to actually do the experiment. And Mark actually did a project before Seeing Eye. So to explain, it was called Data Shadow, and during Data Shadow, he was exploring privacy, and he's very concerned that we're losing our privacy, and you can see that now with COVID, how they're using it as a mechanism to bring in all this, these draconian surveillance laws. So he was warning about that early on, and the project Data Shadow, he got everyone, as an individual, he got you to, this is outside a college in Cambridge, he got a shipping container, and got you to go. He took your phone off you, and in 2 minutes, he gave you back your phone and said, "Go in the shipping container." And in the shipping container, he projected on the walls of the shipping container your most secret, dodgy data on the walls, and he was just showing that how there is no privacy, and all of that is easily accessible. And during the press conference after the show, there was a load of journalists there, and he gave away all of his passwords to all of his social media, his bank account, his phone, just on an A4 piece of paper, which is entirely illegal. You're not allowed to do that. But he did this, and I'd taken him to Japan to be on a panel on context engineering about 6 months beforehand, and he mentioned this project, but I'd completely forgotten what he was planning to do. So as soon as I got this A4 bit of paper, I logged onto his Facebook and changed the password. And then I logged onto his Twitter and changed his password. I should have logged onto his Hotmail because that was the master account. But I put my hand up and said, "I've got your Facebook, I've got your Twitter." He was very angry because he was like, "I know you though. That's not allowed." I was like, "No, I didn't know there were any rules. You didn't tell us anything about that." So, but in the pub afterwards, he sort of calmed down a bit, and he was like, "Well, at least give me my data," because he'd forgotten to download his own data. And the second thing he was after was me to look at his Facebook, to look at his Messenger, to see what a person he was, because he'd also created another website where he wanted the people that had got into his social media, to out him, to get his most disturbing data online, so that he could basically be desecrated, so that he could leave that personality behind before adopting a new one in the Seeing Eye project. And what I found really interesting was that I did look at his data, and I looked at how he spoke to his mates, how he spoke to his mum, how he spoke to his peers, and how he spoke to his girlfriend, how he flirted with other girls. And it was like I was inside his head. I was in his subjective state in a way that I would never have access to or be privy to otherwise. And so I thought that was really interesting. And hacking the subjective state, when I was working on a project which is now finished, the WEKIT project, when we were looking at how do we hack somebody's objective state, and how do we use augmented reality to track your head movement, your eye movement, your hand movement, your finger movement, and basically enable a novice to wear the expert using augmented reality. So that was capturing the objective performance. How do we capture somebody's subjective state? So moving on to the Seeing Eye project. In the Seeing Eye project, Mark is going to wear somebody else for it was going to be a month, and a month was chosen because it takes a month to form habits. It's now been reduced to 14 days just because it's quite a feat to wear a VR headset for such a long period of time, because it is a bit like staring at a television for that long, and he's not going to be allowed to take it off. And what he's going to be seeing is somebody else through somebody else's eyes. So he won't have access to his own eyes, he won't have access to his own hearing, and he'll be living through the eyes of another. And yeah, there's tons and tons and tons of stuff we could go into on it, but the point is that the practice runs already happened. That's why I was wearing the headset in that talk, because he wore 10 different people in 10 days. So he did it like a day job. So not full time, he wore them for between 10 and 12 hours a day. And he would be wearing like a 70-year-old woman one day, and then an 18-year-old girl the next, and 8 other people, including myself, just to test it out. And we launched it at Ars Electronica in Austria. And we wanted to see, how he would cope with this new reality. And a lot of my research is looking at the social implications and the social effects and affects of these technologies. And I got interested in the Seeing Eye project because of the hikikomori. And when in 2015, I won a Winston Churchill Fellowship to go to Japan and to study the hikikomori. And the hikikomori are 500,000 young people, mostly men, that have logged out of society and said, that's it, I'm going to stay home, I'm going to just game, I'm just going to be online, I'm going to have my food delivered, I'm not going to take part in the world anymore, I'm just going to literally log out. And if you think about the film Ready Player One, when the virtual realm becomes so alluring that we no longer we're no longer in the world anymore, because we just use the physical world as a base layer to jump into the virtual. Because in the virtual you can be whoever you want to be, you're not limited by your looks, you're not limited by your gender, and it's an infinite playground. And I think the dangers that we face with the mainstreaming of virtual reality, and Mark Frid's looking very closely at this, is that we will no longer want to live in the real world. We won't need to. And we've always been looking for escape routes for time immemorial. And one of the things I'm doing with the Double Consciousness Project is to look at those different escape routes. So you could argue that VR is one. If we can live in virtual reality, that's definitely a probable escape route for having a double consciousness, or living in parallel. Another one would be dream hacking. So we've seen lots of attempts to have lucid dreams. A lot of people have perfected that art. It's not easy to have a lucid dream. Most people on average have one in their lives. I know you've had an interesting one, which you should tell us about. But the point is that, is it by design that they're very rare and hard to achieve? And if technology enables us to have them, and I'm not just talking about digital technology, although that could be one part, because there's a lot of research going into transcranial stimulation. So wearing a cap while you're asleep, and during REM, a small amount of electricity hitting the left or the right angular gyrus to create a lucid dream, a reliable lucid dream. But that's one part of it. And I know Sam is looking into a lot of this stuff. And so galantamine, if you combine the transcranial with a smart drug like galantamine, which is known to allow you to enter lucid dream states, then that stacking starts to make this a reality. But as my friend Sean from the Waldorf Project says, he had an amazing lucid dream where he was basically living a whole life in one night, and he met a girl and fell in love. They got married, they had a baby, then she cheated on him, they got divorced, and he was an old man and killed himself, I think. And then he was so profoundly altered by this dream that he woke up and he wrote the whole thing down. And it took him 12 hours to write the dream down. And then he went back to sleep and had another mad dream. So the danger of that, again, is that we live in this nested ecology of a double consciousness where actually only one side of the consciousness is being nourished and the other side is being neglected. So that's the second example, living in a virtual or living in a lucid dream state. And the third example, and I'm writing a paper on this at the moment, which is why it's so forefront in my mind, is DMT extended, which I know you know about. So the work of Andrew Gallimore, Rick Strassman, and others that are trying to achieve this. I know they're trying to get this kick-started in Imperial. It's going to be one of the next studies that I'm going to try and experience. DMT extended is the ability to prolong the DMT high, the peak of the DMT experience, we'll probably start with 30 minutes or something like that, so an extension of 3 times. But the brilliant talk from Andrew Gallimore at Breaking Convention was
phenomenal.
The idea that we could permanently exit the 3rd dimension and live in hyperspace. And I joked to Altered Futures last weekend that, you know, everyone's talking now about not so much altered states, but altered traits. And how do we have permanent benefits from these substances and these techniques? And I joked that, you know, if there was an altered trait to be had, then maybe the DMT extended experiment will create it. And I'm not advocating it at all, but what I'm really excited about is that I see a language in the core of my vision during my NN-DMT experiences, which is very much holographic. It's at the core of the center of my field of vision. It's like ancient and modern hieroglyphs, and it's persistent. It's there all the time, and I'm able to sort of, the more I go into that realm, I can start to remember more and more of it, but it's always there. But if I'm on a DMT extended experiment, I may actually be able to sit there and draw it and bring it back.
Wow.
So that's what I'm really intrigued by with these experiences. And I talk about double consciousness because I want to nourish both sides of the equation. I don't just want to do what Andrew's saying, which is exit this realm. And he's already looking at waste management and putting people in pods, very much Matrix style. I think that we're here to have a human experience, and there's a reason why we have access to these other areas, other Matrix-like structures of light or realms of light. But you know, I'm very aware that there's a reason why we're here, and I'm very aware that maybe the DMT realm is a death-like realm, or is you in the future. And I know that you were listening to my experience of being in an fMRI scanner, having an experience at Imperial where they intravenously gave me DMT, and the onrush of the entities coming to visit me, and the variety of those entities, all very concerned for me, because I was obviously in a setting that was completely unusual. And the benevolence and the concern for from these entities was so profound and so, so obvious, much more obvious than it had been before, because they thought I was dying. They really thought, you're in trouble here. What's going on? Can we do anything to help? Please don't die. They were showing me visually in some sort of an incredible visualization that I'm immortal. But they were also saying, don't die now because you're in a human form. And I was just gobsmacked that I spent the entire time trying to calm them down. And then I had to go back 2 weeks later. I really didn't want to go back in the scanner because of their warnings. And as I know you've mentioned, Tony, they had warned me not to do this, not to go back in. But unfortunately, I was part of a study, and I would have let Chris Timmerman down and the rest of the team if I hadn't have gone and done the second phase of the study. Interestingly, the EEG failed, so the data was rubbish anyway. But what was marked was that none of the entities came back. It was a same sort of landscape, but completely barren of these entities, because they were like, we told you not to do this. We're not going to come and tell you again because you're crying wolf. And I think what's most likely the case is that when you're doing a DMT journey, you're jumping up into this realm, which if it is true that we release DMT at death, then these are your guides. These are your guides to take you across to the next realm. And if you are just playing at this stuff, and if you're just doing it without respect, and if you're just doing it in a way that is not conducive, then you're going to piss off those guides. And I'm more in the 5-MeO camp, because I think that is death. I think what you access during 5-MeO is death. So therefore, there are no guides to piss off. So I think for me, that's a safer realm, even though it's like climbing Everest and you only need to do it once. So yeah, that was a bit of a long answer to your question.
Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary and fascinating beyond words. You know, just that description is just unbelievable. And it's the idea, I hope the people, if the people who are watching this now, or the people who will listen to this in the future, realize this is the leading edge of research that's taking place now. This is not a load of guys down the pub. This is academic research taking place at Imperial College in London. This is the real breaking out of our belief systems and our understanding of exactly what reality really is. Carl, can you just explain a little bit about the project you're involved in at Imperial? Because I know I've mentioned it many, many times, but it would be good to be able to put it into context, exactly what is taking place there.
Yeah, well, the study, the NN-DMT study from Chris, was two-phased. First phase was intravenous DMT with EEG, so just looking with EEG at the brain. Second phase was looking at EEG plus fMRI. So they're looking at blood flow. They're looking at what parts of the brain are being affected at what part of the experience. And Chris has found that it is very much the signature of the brain is very much like being asleep, being in a dream state. And I was fascinated by his conversation with Andrew Gallimore about this, because Andrew, and I agree with Andrew, it's certainly more than that. It may have the signature of sleep or dreaming rather, but there's a lot more to it, and that's why I think these next experiments are going to be super critical. The DMT extended experiments and the 5-MeO study, which is happening. We've been doing a field study in Amsterdam where it's completely legal. So I think that once we get an understanding of the difference between the NN-DMT state from the brain's perspective, and once we see the difference with the 5-MeO and how what differences there are in the brain. I had an amazing conversation before this one with Rodrigo, who I know you're going to chat to.
He's going to be a future guest, yes. And he's listening in. I just noticed he's on here.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm really intrigued by with his work is that he's claiming that he can get people into a DMT state without DMT. And I'm really, really, really interested in that, because I spend a lot of time with transhumanists. I spend a lot of time thinking about, do we want to go down a route of total dependence on technology? I've got friends that say we've always been dependent on technology, and in fact our humanity itself is dependent. It comes from technology and our interaction with technology, and I think there's a lot to that as well. But it's the type of dependence that I'm interested in, and the ability, to use a technology, much like we use the stabilizers on our bike to learn how to cycle. We remove them. We remove the scaffolding after we learn the skill. So if there's a way of looking at the work of Imperial, understanding what brain state DMT puts you in, and then trying your own way, your own technique of getting you to that brain state, and you can then measure somebody and say, no, you didn't have an out-of-body experience, or you didn't have the near-death experience, or you didn't have a DMT experience, because we have the brain data for what that looks like.
Yeah.
So, if we can use technologies as a way of actually accessing our own innate abilities and to grow our own potential, because I think that we've atrophied all those muscles through the badly designed technologies. Much like the GPS means we have no sense of direction. The spell checker means we never learn to spell. All of those things are very real, and I think that we're cottoning on to this fact that we're going to have the next generation, if we're not teaching them that they have to do these things for themselves, that they use the internet not as something you plug into to do all your cognition for you, but something you go to as a resource when you haven't found those answers for yourselves. I think that it's really a massive education problem. It's understanding that these technologies are so powerful, the virtual realities are so intense because your brain thinks it's happening. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I'm really intrigued with to work with Imperial on is, how do we prepare somebody for an entheogen experience like 5-MeO DMT? Because one of the prices of admission is letting go. And you're not going to just let go with your cognition. It's not something you can think about. I'm going to let go, I'm going to let go. You have to embody it. You have to live it. And I tried this amazing experience called Rick's Plank Experience, which is a VR experience and you go up in a lift. So you're in the virtual realm. You're walking around as you can with the Oculus Quest, which is untethered. You walk into this elevator in the virtual world. You go up the lift, and then the doors open, and you're just looking at a cityscape. You're at the top of this building, and you see a plank in front of you, and your brain's going, "Don't go anywhere near that plank. Don't do it. Don't do it." And the whole point of the game is actually to go on the plank and then fall off. And obviously, everything, your whole, and it's really interesting seeing, how your brain's protecting you, and survival is the main function of the brain. So you're going against everything your brain's telling you to do, and it's a process of letting go. And you're dropping to the floor. You're falling at the same rate that gravity allows, and then you hit the floor, and then there's a wipeout when you die in this virtual realm. And I was like, wow, this is a brilliant mechanism for allowing you to practice in an embodied way the process of letting go, to prepare for such entities or whatever else you're trying to prepare for. Learning how to die well is a tremendous art. And my co-founder Jose is working on a near-death experience for just that. And I think if we can use the virtual to build parallel realities that enable us to think, oh, would I want to live in that reality? Is that the way we want to build the third dimension? We're in a crisis of meaning at the moment, so we need these other realities to practice ways of living that we currently can't.
This is the completely different angle from transhumanism that most people would necessarily think about, because I know you've spoken with Ray Kurzweil and individuals like that. But what you were just describing there, my brain is going 10 to the dozen thinking, what's the implications for this? What's the implications for that? If the next generation is evolving where they have this symbiotic relationship with virtual reality, like the cases with people on Second Life, where people are having whole alternate lives on Second Life. Then extrapolating from that, your point about having a life experience in a lucid dream and living a whole alternate life. And I've had 2 of those dreams in my life. And recently I had a really uncanny dream, which has completely shattered my concept of everything. And you intimated earlier on about my own lucid dream state, when I've only ever had one profound lucid dream state, and that changed everything. It changed completely my understanding of what I am, who I am, where I am located, where my consciousness is located. I'm suddenly not 6 inches behind my eyes. I'm somewhere completely different. I'm gaining information from everywhere. Absolutely, Carl, this has been an unbelievable interview, and I know that people out there, this is where we are going. This is where myself and my group of associates are going. We are not playing with this. This is really powerful stuff that we're working on. We are pushing the envelope of human civilization at the moment, and what it is to be conscious and what it is to be alive and a thinking entity. Carl, absolutely astounding. Can you let everybody know how they can contact you, the various areas that you're involved in and everything else to end the interview? Because I'm sure there's going to be people out there that are going to be going, I really want to know more about this guy's work. So please fire away.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I'll give you one tiny other little takeaway, which is one thing that I learned from Andy Letcher, brilliant podcast recently with Lauren Fields, and he talked about this idea of double consciousness living elsewhere from the perspective of what the cordyceps mushroom does to the ant, and
the one that climbs to the top.
This mushroom basically infects the ant, and it becomes a zombie. It basically gets onto a leaf at a certain angle and chomps onto the leaf, and then a mushroom grows out of this ant, and then it spreads its spores, infecting all the other ants beneath. And I was intrigued by that, because the ant for a while will carry on as normal, won't know it's infected, will carry on doing anti stuff. So it's having this sort of double consciousness. It's 2 organisms living in one space. And obviously it doesn't end well for the ant, and you could argue it's not a real form of double consciousness, because not both sides of the equation are not being nourished at the same time. But then he started talking about the symbiosis of what's happened to the human as a result of psilocybin, and the fact that we're kind of in service of the mushroom, because
Wow.
we've gathered sort of 200 different psilocybin mushrooms. We know what they do to our consciousness, and in turn they're transforming our consciousness. So we're spreading them, and they're spreading our consciousness. And I think that is an actual example of double consciousness, because both are being nourished at the same time. So I'm just going to leave you with that. In terms of contacting me, feel free to add me on Facebook. I use it as a blog for all of these ideas, and you can just find me as Carl H. Smith on Facebook. Cyberdelicsociety.com. Feel free to join us on there. We're also going to start an academy, Holotechnica Academy, soon, which is basically looking at those stacks, those combinations. So moist media, how do we combine these different techniques to create recipes for consciousness augmentation. Technomancy.club is going to be a new link that I'm going to start up soon, which is all about, so technomancy is the combination of magic with a K and technology. And also my email is c.smith@rave.ac.uk. So any of those you can reach me on.
Simply astounding. This is the level we're now taking Consciousness Hour to. This is really what we really are all about here. Thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you've enjoyed it all. I certainly have. My head is now spinning with lots of ideas for a lot of projects I'm working on in terms of double consciousness at the moment. So Carl, thank you very much. Let's hope that we can get this event off the ground next year in Greece, because this is going to be absolutely sensational. If we can recreate Plato's cave in the location that Plato's cave said or believed, or where he thought he used the model of this cave for his allegory of the cave, this is going to be very, very exciting stuff. So, Carl, thank you. Wonderful guest. Absolutely my brain is smashed, as I knew it would be. Okay, thank you very much. Cheers.
Thanks, Harry.
Okay.
Cheers. Thank you.